Hello and welcome to our first Q&A, first live Q&A here at The Economist. My name is Anna Bucks. I'm a producer director with the Films Department, and we are here to talk about Hong Kong and the situation in Hong Kong. A lot of you have already sent in some questions. Thank you very much for that. And if you've got any questions over the next 15 minutes or so, please do send them in. And I will be asking Robert Guest, who is a foreign editor here at The Economist. Hello, Robert. Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
This is a very important topic, the situation in Hong Kong. It's one that The Economist has covered a lot over the last few weeks. We've had a couple of front covers on it. Why is it such an important situation?
Well, there's two reasons. Firstly, if you have a territory of 7.3 million people and a quarter of them come out onto the streets yet again over the weekend, demanding some say in how they're governed, demanding not to be put at the mercy of China's opaque and entirely lawless judicial system, partly lawless judicial system, that matters. These are people, their rights matter. But the second reason why it's of global consequence is because it tells you something about China's future relations with the outside world. Hong Kong is the gateway to China. It is the place where the majority of foreign direct investment that goes into China flows through Hong Kong. It's the place where foreign companies that want to have their headquarters, that want to do business in China, will place their headquarters. It's the place where Chinese companies, if they're private and they're reputable and they seek global recognition, they will list in Hong Kong rather than in the Chinese stock market. So it's absolutely crucial place. The freedoms that it has are a crucial part of how China has managed to succeed over the past 3 decades. And it's facing the question, is China going to snuff this out or not?
And I should just point out actually that I made a film last week, which you can watch if you click on the eye on the screen, which is about what's at stake for China. But perhaps you could just go into a bit more detail about the dilemma that China is facing. Well,
China faces a huge dilemma here. On the one hand, the people in charge in Beijing are rational. They know that if they were to send the army in and crush the demonstrations in Hong Kong, which they could very easily do that. You have a very large army just parked across the border. You have a garrison already in Hong Kong. They could crush them. But if they did that, they would destroy the whole understanding, the whole basis of what's made Hong Kong so prosperous and important. The feeling that this was a place where you could be in China, you could be doing business with China, but you would be under different systems, a place where businesses could feel that the rule of law applied, that they couldn't be just spirited away into some dark secret dungeon somewhere because they'd offended someone powerful within the party. All those things would be under threat if China were to crush this revolt. So my guess is that they're probably not going to. But at the same time, can they tolerate, can the authoritarian regime in China, which remember has a ruler who has pretty much declared himself ruler for life, can they tolerate the open and mass expression of dissent, of people demanding a say in who their rulers are? That's not something they would tolerate on the mainland. So the question is, how long are they prepared to let that last in Hong Kong?
And that leads us on to our first question. And a lot of people have been asking this, and if you've got any other questions that you want to send in, please do. So what is the possibility the protesters might lose spirit and just sort of decide to call it a day without any major concessions? And someone else wants to know what is the end game here? It's a similar question.
Okay, well, over the weekend we've just had, by the protesters' estimates, 1.7 million people came out in the rain, on the streets, despite the fear of losing their jobs, despite the fear of being shot in the eye, despite the fear of being killed. That's a quarter of the population of Hong Kong. Now, the police have come up with a lower estimate than that, but they're, I fear, rather biased, and their estimate is massively contradicted by the pictures that we've seen on television. So that suggests that people are utterly passionate about this, that they really care about their future, and that they would, they want concessions. Now, can they last for years, that's an open question. We don't know.
We've got a question from Milan Prasad, who asks, are the protesters rallying behind a leader, or is there any sort of central leadership for their struggle? Can you just tell us a bit about how the protesters are organised?
Well, there is a loose coalition of pro-democracy groups and NGOs, sometimes helped by unions and other groups who are calling for the demonstrations and are being answered in very large numbers. There isn't one leader. I think if there was just one leader, that would be a very dangerous position to have. So there's a deliberate dispersal of responsibility, because you don't want a movement that can be decapitated by removing one person.
I'm interested, you've covered a lot of protests over your many years working in journalism. How does the Hong Kong protest compare to other protests that you've covered, and do you think that ultimately they will achieve what they want?
Well, it's a very large protest to begin with. Very few places I can think of in the world where you can get those kinds of crowds on the street. It's been mostly peaceful. It hasn't been entirely peaceful. Obviously, the police have shot, beanbag pellets into people's eyes, and there have been some demonstrators, including over the weekend, which was mostly peaceful. There were some demonstrators who threw eggs at a police station and overturned some rubbish bins. But by the standards of protests this big, it has been very peaceful, and it's essential that it remain so, because if the protesters start, killing or injuring people, that will give the authorities a pretext to crack down very hard indeed. The thing that is difficult, it is always much easier for a non-violent protest movement to succeed if the people they're protesting against have some conscience. So, demonstrations against Saddam Hussein never worked because he just killed everybody. Demonstrations against, Gandhi's demonstrations against the British in India ultimately prevailed because, with some exceptions, the ruling power was not prepared to use massive lethal force on an entire country that big. So, those things tend to win. With China, it's very hard to say. I mean, they don't want to have lots of people dead in the streets, but they have in the past demonstrated a willingness to do that. Now, in the Tiananmen Square massacre 30 years ago, that was hotly debated within the Chinese leadership. There were those who said, no, we should just let the demonstrations continue. They will burn themselves out eventually. And there were those who said, no, we cannot tolerate any public affront to the authority of the Communist Party to rule forever without reference to voters, and let's shoot them now. And that was the rule that prevailed. My suspicion is that the Chinese army is more restrained and more professional now than it was 30 years ago, and that the leadership is more attuned to just what a disaster it would be if they put the army onto the streets of Hong Kong and started killing people. But you can never rule anything out.
I mean, a lot of the comments that we've had have been about international response, and a lot of people have mentioned the fact that Hong Kong was a British colony, and have asked, will the UK intervene? What is British responsibility here?
Well, I mean, you can argue that Britain has a historic responsibility, but I don't think it has any power to intervene. I mean, the British government could make a statement, I don't know, saying that possibly the Chinese government was not adhering to all the agreements that were made at the time of the handover in the 1990s, but it doesn't realistically have any leverage to make the Chinese government do anything other than what the Chinese government wants to do. This is a crisis that will be resolved based on the decisions of the Chinese government and the people of Hong Kong.
We've just had a comment that's just come in that says, do you foresee the US getting more involved in this affair?
No. I mean, it's very clear that Donald Trump is not interested. He has, in fact, quite wrongly characterized the movement as being a riot. He's not paying attention to the details. He's interested in his trade dispute with China, which he views purely through the lens of what's happening to American manufacturing. So, no, I don't think that the Americans are going to get involved. Now, interestingly, within China, within the Chinese media, there's this ridiculous conspiracy theory that is being put out that this is entirely cooked up by the West, that this is not a spontaneous display by Hong Kongers of dissatisfaction with the authoritarian big brother next door, but something that has been fomented and orchestrated by foreign forces, meaning the Americans. Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, firstly, they have no reason to want to do that, and secondly, they have no capacity to do that. The idea that the CIA could get 2 million people onto the streets of Hong Kong is ridiculous. The frightening thing is, as our Chagwan columnist pointed out recently, quite a lot of people within the Chinese government appear to believe this, and that's worrying.
And if you want to read that, you can click on the I now, and I should hopefully give you the link to that article on the Economist website. If the UK isn't going to do anything and America's not going to do anything, if you're a Hong Kong protester right now, who do you ask for help from? Who can help you? Any organisation, and which other countries? Who's going to come to their aid?
Well, no one. I mean, they need to stick together. They need to stand firm, and they need to be aware that although the Chinese government has most of the power, it doesn't hold all of the cards. By being out on the streets and asking for things, they create a set of incentives whereby it's very much in the interest of the Chinese government to be patient, to wait, to possibly make some concessions, and to hope for this to eventually get quieter. But it's not that outsiders are going to come to the rescue of Hong Kongers. It's that Hong Kongers, by boldly expressing their desire for the freedoms that they were promised, may prevail.
A lot of our commenters have been asking about Taiwan, and they've been asking about Macau. Mm-hmm. Could you just talk a little bit about how this situation in Hong Kong might affect Taiwan?
Okay. Well, Taiwan is the really important one. So the Chinese government, one of their most important stated goals is the reunification of Taiwan with the motherland. Now, the way things stand at the moment, where Taiwan is a rich democracy and China is a dictatorship, there's no way that that's going to happen voluntarily. You can't get 20 million people and make them voluntarily give up the right to vote, voluntarily give up the freedom that they currently enjoy from being arrested in the middle of the night by an unaccountable state. Nobody surrenders that voluntarily. The only way that in the relatively short term you could imagine a voluntary reunification, i.e. a reunification without a war, would be if the Hong Kong one country, two systems idea were seen to be working. If it was seen to be the case that Hong Kong, having been promised a continuation of the rule of law and civil liberties for 50 years after the handover, if that was really respected by China. So this is the other really big reason why it would be disastrous from China's perspective, from the perspective of the Chinese Communist Party, to crush the demonstrations in Hong Kong, is that would make it absolutely impossible to get a voluntary reunification with Taiwan, and of course a war would be catastrophic.
And just to ask you about Macau, we've got a question here from Wenlin Sima. Macau is another former colony. Why does it remain largely quiet compared to Hong Kong?
It's much smaller. It's not a place. I mean, Hong Kong has a sort of vibrant, dynamic, mobile, outward-facing economy with lots of people passing through and lots of a broad understanding among the population of the benefits of dealing with the outside world and of the rule of law. Macau is a special place. They have casinos there, but it's nowhere near as sophisticated a place as Hong Kong.
Brilliant. I think we should leave it there. Thank you very much, Robert. Thank you for joining me. Thank you so much to all your questions as well. This is the first in a series of live YouTube Q&As that we'll be running. If you click on the bell, then you can subscribe, and we'll be able to let you know when the next one is coming up. And that's going to be on reforestation and climate change. We'll be asking, can trees save the planet? If you want to read more about what The Economist has written on Hong Kong and the situation there, you can go to the Economist website, economist.com, and you can subscribe. You can either subscribe to the paper or get a digital subscription. And stay tuned for more of these Q&As. Thank you so much for watching.
Thank you.